Hello, my name is Ryan Sullivan, and I'm one of the detectives for the Red Wing Police Department. Today, we're conducting a community notification informing citizens that a Level 3 predatory offender is being released from custody and will be residing within our community. This offender will be monitored by the Minnesota Department of Corrections team of intensive supervised released agents. For prior Level 3 predatory offender releases, the Red Wing Police Department has scheduled a public meeting to share this information with the community. Due to the COVID-19 crisis and social distancing requirements, we will be providing this information to you virtually. At the end of this presentation, any remaining questions can be directed to Detective Tom Rickley, whose email will be seen at the bottom of the screen. The Red Wing Police Department is just one of several agencies with a role in monitoring the predatory offenders who reside within our city. With regards to the Red Wing Police, we have no control over which offenders are released. We also have no control over when they're released or whether they will be residing in our community or not. That task is the responsibility of the Minnesota Department of Corrections. The job of the Red Wing Police Department is to ensure that all predatory offenders who live in Red Wing are up to date and compliant with their registration requirements. When I say predatory offender registration requirements, I mean that offenders have to provide the police with several things, including their current address, any secondary addresses or frequently visited places, phone numbers, all employment information, and information about all vehicles they may own. This information is entered into a database so police departments across the state have access to the most accurate information about these offenders. The Red Wing Police Department also conducts routine and random predatory offender registration checks to ensure that offenders who live within Red Wing are current and compliant in their requirements. As mentioned before, the Red Wing Police Department is one of many agencies tasked with supervision and management of these offenders. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Agent Brad Vandervet from the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Brad will, in greater detail, explain the role that the Minnesota Department of Corrections has with regards to supervising the predatory offenders in the city of Red Wing and the state of Minnesota. Thank you.
Well, hello and thank you for taking the time to review this important information. My name is Brad Vandervet and I'm with the Minnesota Department of Corrections in the Risk Assessment and Community Notification Unit. And I'm here today to assist the Red Wing Police Department in provide to you some important information, not only about the individual registrant you're here to learn about today, but about the state's broader risk management system and how it applies in a more comprehensive way. And so my presentation is going to come really in kind of three distinct parts. I'm going to work to set a foundational understanding of how these different systems and components work together to accomplish the overall mission of mitigating risk and enhancing public safety. And then I'm going to use that information as an overlay as we get into the specific details about the registrant you're here to learn about today. And then I will transition on to some resources that are available in community and statewide and beyond that you can use to apply as you're taking this important information and working it into those family and community safety plans. So to begin, I think the place that makes the most sense as we start a conversation like this is to kind of start where we all have a fundamental knowledge and understanding. And that is that those who engage in this type of harm, this sexual harm or conduct that requires registration, they exist. They are not new to our communities. And so really the question then comes down to, well, because we know they are out there and we know that the likelihood, given the numbers and what we understand them to be, that they exist within all communities, what is it that we as state and county and city agencies are doing to mitigate the risk of those who we've identified? And so one of those key components in that broader state risk management system is the registry. Now, the registry came online in 1991 and is really born out of the advocacy of the Jacob Wetterling family following the abduction of Jacob and on to other advocacy groups where they really went around to law enforcement following that tragedy and said, what more can we do to provide agencies with as robust a tools as possible so that something like this might be better managed and potentially mitigated. And law enforcement really resoundingly said, what we need is a system to collate all the data that exists on those who we've become aware of through our law enforcement duties and interactions so that it's more broadly available, because we know Mr. Heinrich was engaging in his criminal conduct well beyond the boundaries of the community where he resided. And so this really created that foundation of the registry. And so the registry is maintained by the state's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, or BCA, and it is private in nature by law. All the information that's collected and maintained is for specifically law enforcement and correctional use only. And so it's a robust amount of data that they collect and maintain. Things like the registrant's address, and that's their primary address, to include any secondary addresses. Think of places like cabins or family members' homes or significant others' homes that they may frequent. Law enforcement is to be made aware by the registrant of those locations. They also must register their places of employment. If they operate a motor vehicle for that employer, they also need to register that information as well. A registrant must also provide law enforcement with information on any schools they're attending, and any vehicles that they themselves use, own, operate, or possess. So even the old car in the driveway that probably doesn't operate must be known to law enforcement. All other things that they have to register are places that they rent, such as storage units and things of that nature, and their phone numbers and so on. And so this is the robustness of that data set, so that should law enforcement need to quickly pare down a search individual, say an Amber Alert goes out, they can run against the database, give me all vehicles of this make, model, color, or license plate partial, and instantly begin to eliminate or include individuals that may require additional looking at or investigation. So you can see how this is very useful for them in that effort. So the next question that often will come when I start talking about the registry and how it's structured is, well, then who has to register, Brad? And the registry has really kind of grown and developed, as many of our laws do, over time. And it began to only include, or at that time only had, those convicted or charged with sex offending conduct or behavior, but has grown to include other non-sex specific types of criminal conduct, such as kidnapping and false imprisonment. And this is why some of you may recall the name change from the state's sex offender registry to the predatory offender registry. And a simple way to keep it straight in your mind as I go forward today with this information is that all sex offenders are predatory offenders, while not all predatory offenders are sex offenders. So just a way to kind of keep it straight. Another thing to really just kind of give you that broad perspective of the totality of this conversation and what's going on in and around our state is here in this slide. As I mentioned earlier, it's likely that registered individuals and those who engage in this type of harm exist in all communities in and around our state. We can see as of the first of this year, there were approximately 18,727 registered individuals in Minnesota. And that would be individuals with no risk level assigned, or those with risk levels 1, 2, or 3. And as of today, you can see that there were at the snapshot, and again, this is a 30,000-foot flyover view, and these numbers are dynamic. They're constantly fluctuating and changing. But again, just to broaden that awareness for you, you can see in Goodhue County, there were 109 registered individuals reporting residents, primary residents within Goodhue County, 3 of whom are those designated a risk level 3 or subject to broad public notification. If we narrow in the scope to Red Wing proper, you can see 63 of that 109 are reporting residents within Red Wing. And the 3 that we see from Goodhue are residents within Red Wing, those 3 that are subject to that broad public notification. You can look at areas around the Goodhue County region and see neighboring counties such as Dakota has 562 registered individuals reporting residence within their county, 7 of whom are those subject to broad public notification. So you can see the larger number to the left is all registrants, those with no risk level assigned, risk levels of 1, 2, or 3, and the number to the right are those who are subject to broad public notification, those level 3 individuals. So you may look at like Wabasha County and see that they have 0 subject to broad public notification. So should a resident of Wabasha County, for example, go on to the Department of Corrections website and look on the public registrant search where we would show that smaller number so that you would be able to see who they are and where they reside, etc., they would think to themselves potentially that there are none in or within their county and therefore their community. However, that would be an inaccurate presumption. As you can see, Wabasha has 48 registrants, and we know that because 0 of them are subject to broad public notification, those individuals are either those with no level assigned or those of level 1 or 2. And so again, broad awareness is just so very critical. Another thing you'll no doubt be considering as you're looking at these numbers and contemplating the totality of this is that these individuals move with frequency. Not only do they relocate their residence, but also they're crossing city and state at the time for work purposes, for recreational purposes, and the like. And so we know that that awareness is just so much better if we keep it broad and not just solely focused on, say, the 3 individuals in Red Wing. We know it's so much larger than that. Another component of that broader state risk management system that I want to discuss and share with you today as we go forward is then the Community Notification Act. Now that came online later in the 90s, 97, and is really founded on the understanding from the research that had been conducted that a well-informed community is in fact a safer community. Oftentimes sentiment can be, Brad, why do we do these meetings? They just unnerve us so badly. They cause fear and anger and frustration and confusion over our systems and processes. And truth be told, we know that by having these difficult conversations and really sharing all the information we possibly can, is that we increase awareness and therefore decrease or mitigate the risk of the particular individual or individuals subject to this level of notification. By shining a big light of awareness on them, we take away one of those key components of offending conduct, and that is secrecy. We take that away from them. So this is the Notification Act. And because this is the reason we're here talking today, it's worth going into a little more detail as to how it works. So you've heard me referencing registrants with no level assigned. And you're wondering probably, why is there a category with no level assigned? Well, it's because they're not assessed. So in order for a registered predatory offender to be assessed for a risk level, they must have crossed the threshold of prison by law. And that does not count for county jail. So if they've served local time as a part of a probationary sentence, they would not be subject to that that risk level assessment and assignment. So if they're being released from state prison, you can presume then that they're going to have a risk level assigned. And if you notice that they're not on that public registrant search, you go to look them up, you know the case, or you've been aware of it and you've been tracking it, and you see that they're not on the DOC's public registrant search, you can then reasonably conclude they were assessed and assigned a lower level of either 1 or 2. This applies also to out-of-state registrants coming into the state from other communities throughout the nation. It does also include federal prisons and military prisons, or those, and you've heard me talk about those subject to broad public notification because it's not all just those designated level 3. It also applies to those civilly committed individuals who have been specifically civilly committed for sex offending conduct or behaviors. And so those are the group that would be subject to a risk level assessment, assignment, and potentially broad public notification determined by that level assigned. All right, so those it does not apply to then would be those individuals like we talked about with stayed or probationary sentences where the court may have imposed a sentence onto them and then stayed the imposition or the execution of that sentence and allotted them the opportunity to remain in the community under supervision with a probation agent through either county supervision or statewide supervision, depending on the size of the county or community, and given a list of conditions and terms they must abide by in order to stay in the community and not go to prison. And we know that should they cross the threshold of prison, then the risk level gets applied. And it also does not apply to those juvenile registrants. And so that's a population that is not assessed or assigned a risk level as well. All right, so once a registrant comes across that threshold, and now they've met that statutory obligation to have a level assessed and assigned, who does what? Well, the Department of Corrections is tasked with assessing and assigning that risk level. And the way we do that at the DOC is through the End of Confinement Review Committee, the ECRC. And the way this committee is formulated is that it's a 5-person committee composed of the chair designated by the warden, a law enforcement professional, a treatment professional, sex offender specific treatment professional, and a supervision of sex offenders specifically professional. And that group, and a victim services advocate dealing with victims directly. And so that group of individuals will then look at the risk level assessment, presumptive determination, what the tool reports it should be, and then they will ultimately vote on what that risk level is. Now, really quickly, I want to speak to that tool, and it's known as the MinSOS, or the Minnesota Sex Offender Screening Tool. And the MinSOS is born out of that research, that really detailed research study that the Department of Corrections engaged in and started way back in the 90s. So in the early 90s, as they saw these laws coming online, they began this research that extended initially in its first phase all the way into the early 2000s, where they initially followed over 3,166 known sex offenders specifically back into the community following their releases over that decade, over beyond that decade's time frame. And that assessment, those assessors marked those individuals' successes and their failures, and in this created those, or found and formulated those known predictive risk factors. And so when I speak today about levels 1 and 2 and 3, know that I'm directly referencing that research study. There was a follow-up study conducted that concluded in 2007, where they followed another additional 2,000 some known sex offenders in the community for over a 4-year period. And so over 5,000 known sex offenders have been looked at with great detail. And again, their successes and failures. And what we found were those presumptive or determined risk factors, okay? And so when I say somebody has been designated risk level 1, what I'm saying is that they share a lower amount of those known predictive risk factors than their peer group from that study. A level 2 has a moderate amount of those known predictive risk factors, and a level 3 has a higher amount of those known predictive risk factors. Just know this about risk assessment tools, is that no matter how good or effective a tool is for risk assessment purposes, there is no tool that is capable of predicting the future. What they do, though, very well is assist law enforcement and corrections in creating and formulating case planning efforts and community policing efforts based on that individual's known information and those predictive factors, so that we can work to mitigate or chip away at those higher risk behaviors or conduct. And so it is a great tool for those purposes. All right, so once a risk level has been assessed and assigned, and also risk levels are dynamic. They do go up and down because those predictive risk factors are dynamic. There are a few that are static, like their criminal history score, but there's many that are dynamic, and it's focusing on what they're doing actively. And so their risk level, much like any other assessment tool, is going to fluctuate along with that registrant, marking their successes or their struggles. So once a risk level is assessed and assigned, then the handoff goes from the DOC to law enforcement. And now law enforcement will provide notification within the scope of that risk level assigned. And so for those designated that lower level, that lower known or amount of predictive risk factors group, level 1, law enforcement will notify other law enforcement agencies or correctional agencies, if applicable, will notify any victims of or witnesses to the offense itself if those individuals have requested that level of enhanced notification. And they will also notify immediate adult household members residing with that registrant. And that is the scope of a level 1 notification. Now, a level 2 notification builds upon that. And so all those individuals and entities we discussed just a second ago with ones, then you go on to level 2s, those moderate amount of known predictive risk factors group. And law enforcement there will provide notification to other individuals or entities that they may designate as being at specific risk based on that registrant's known pattern of offending conduct and behavior. And so it's often believed with a level 2, well, that means law enforcement will notify schools and daycares and churches and places that serve children, etc. And while that may be true, it's not always the case. So say, for example, if law enforcement is aware of a level 2 that's moving into their community and they determine by a review of the packet they receive with all the details and data that's collected by the ECRC committee and ultimately by the risk assessment and notification unit, they determine that this particular level 2 has focused their conduct and behavior, their criminal conduct and harmful behavior against adult female victims at social gatherings. Think places like bars or concert venues or something along that line. Law enforcement may determine it serves no greater public good to notify to notify a daycare facility in this instance, where they serve children ages birth to school age, and maybe makes more sense to notify the proprietors of the bars or the concert venues where this individual may be more likely, given their known pattern of conduct and behavior, to engage in harm again if they were to do that. And so on the flip side, if you look at it the other way, law enforcement becomes aware of a level 2, they review the packet and they determine this individual focuses their conduct and behavior, their harmful conduct and behavior, on unaccompanied minors. Think teens in transit from school to after school activities or home. And law enforcement knows in this scenario in their community that there's a local teen hotspot or hangout where kids will congregate and socialize in those down times. And so in this scenario, law enforcement very well may, with a level 2, go to the proprietor of that teen hangout and say, hey, if you see this guy hanging around, show him the fact sheet. If you see this guy loitering or establishing relationships, talking with the children, let us know. We're going to come out and talk to him and find out more about what he may be up to. And so that's the nuance of a level 2 notification. And then with level 3, those deemed at that with the higher amount of known predictive risk factors, law enforcement then will provide broad public notification. And that comes in many different shapes and forms. It really comes down to how law enforcement best communicates with its community and its citizens. And we in the Department of Corrections thank and recognize the Red Wing Police Department in all of its efforts to ensure that this important information is out and sent out to the largest and most broadest group possible. And we just value their efforts in making sure this gets out to you. And so please do share this as well. A couple other things I want to share with you, back to that research study, just so that you can apply some of this stuff as we get into the details about the man you're here to learn about, so that you can use it effectively, as opposed to just saying, well, Brad showed up and said, here's this guy, here's all his information, take care of yourselves, right? So I want to share with you just, again, kind of that funneling effect we discussed, from those that engage in this kind of harm all the way down to those assessed and assigned with risk levels. And we know that funnel narrows, right? And so here at that final end of that funnel, you can see of those individuals that do cross the threshold of prison, and that number fluctuates year after year, it's different, but the breakdowns of risk levels tends to be quite static, really does. On average, we're assessing the majority at that of risk levels 1 or 2. You'll see about 15%, again on average, are assessed and assigned that risk level 3. And that's that group we get to share more broadly about. So again, as you're thinking about that 18,700 some that are registered, and know that a huge portion of that, the majority, will be no risk level assigned. And then of those that do go into prison, only 15% on average are coming out with that designation of risk level 3. Just knowing that broad awareness is so critical. Snapshot from today, just to kind of really emphasize and put a stamp on this thing. There were, on our public registrant search, if you were to go on it right now and say, show me all of the registered individuals I get to know about in the community, you would see 464 in and around Minnesota communities right now. You would also see there are 11 that are currently out of compliance. So there's 11 whose address is currently unknown and need to be brought back into compliance with law enforcement and the registry. And so that broad awareness, again, just so very critical as these folks are obviously moving in and out of communities daily. Other data that I want to share with you to apply in those family safety planning efforts and broader community safety planning efforts comes down to what we've learned about the relationships between those who engage in this kind of harm and the people they hurt. Now, I actually pulled this data from another research study done by the Department of Justice, but it really mirrors ours. And I just like to show that there's some other companion studies out there that really are getting a lot of the same data back. So that gives us some confidence in what we're seeing. And we can tell from this that the vast majority of those engaging in this kind of harm, hurting children in a sexual way, are known to the victims. They have some kind of a relationship, some sort of trust built in to what's going on. They're either familial or like extended family, cousins, or somehow related, or even step, or they're acquaintances. They have some kind of an acquaintanceship or a relationship, a knowing. You'll see 7% fall into that stranger category. Now, I really do want to focus on that because obviously this is the one that as parents and as community members gives us the most pause, as it should. We think about our family members and our acquaintances, and we think these are people we know, and we can set good boundaries with our kids and our friends and family, and we can really manage that, right? We can get our hands on that. But it's the stranger side that really gives us pause and concern. So a couple things. Understanding first and foremost the limitations of studies like this. In this study and our own, there had to be a cutoff for the assessors, and that cutoff was determined to be 24 hours. And so if the assessor, upon reviewing the criminal complaint and other accompanying documents with the offense itself, could not determine if a relationship existed between the victim and the offender of 24 hours or greater, they would go into the stranger category. And so inevitably what you would find are scenarios like this, is where, say, a bunch of teens are getting together at a house party at a private residence. And at this party, two teens meet up. Perhaps they went to the same high school, but they never ran in the same social circles. They did not know one another. And the night was going the way it was going, and they left the watchful eyes of the group, and they became isolated. Either they left the building or they went to a room and locked themselves away or something to that effect. And the night took an awful turn. Now that would fall into the stranger category. But what we tend to think of more as parents and family members and loved ones is that person that's lurking just beyond our awareness, just outside of our view, of our alertness, who has ill intent. And that, fortunately, that group of offender falls into a much smaller category, to about a 3% range. Now that is cold comfort. I absolutely know and am well aware. But as you're thinking about how you're going to apply your resources best, how you're going to get the most bang for your buck, if you will, is to really focus on that broader aspect as well. If we only focus on that very small portion, we may miss something that is far more likely to be in our family and loved ones' lives. So just use that as you're thinking about how you want to act on this information going forward. Other information I want to share with you as you're contemplating those safety plans is really the age breakdown of victims, of those harmed by this kind of conduct and behavior. And you'll see upon your, no doubt looking at this, you'll see it's broken into thirds. But then very quickly, as you look at the age breakdowns over here on the right, you're going to see that the narrowest age range, that 13 to 17 age range, constitutes 33% of those harmed. That's 9% of the population, and that's really a staggering number and worth unpacking a little bit further about what is going on here. And 2/3 of this group are children. So what do we know as society, as communities, as loved ones and families? Well, we know that children, those birth to 12 age group, are very much still under the watchful eyes and care of their trusted adult support network. And so we in the the Department of Corrections and law enforcement and victim services groups want to make sure we're providing those trusted adults with as much resources and information as possible to build robust safety planning. What happens inevitably is when we move into that 13 to 17 age range is the very thing that we as communities and families work so very hard to achieve, and that's autonomy in our children. We want to support them and provide them with an environment where they can express their own autonomy and go out and develop their own lives. But that very thing is what makes them vulnerable, because now they are formulating relationships outside of the watchful gaze of that trusted adult support network. And so we at the Department of Corrections and our partners in the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center and other victim services agencies throughout the state have really kind of moved away from that older model of the talk, where we would pull our teen aside at that critical age when we as parents determine it's time, and we would sit them down and we would pull back the veil just enough to hopefully help them understand that the world is not as safe as it had been made to be for them when they were younger. But oftentimes what we found with that old model was one of two extreme reactions. Either we'd get a full-on rebuke from our children, "Mom, Dad, you're overreacting. It's fine, it's safe out there. My friends are nice," whatever the case may be. Or on the flip side, we get fear, and our child withdraws from their friendships and their community at large. Neither is an ideal outcome of the talk model, because we don't want to generate fear, not in our children and most certainly not within our community, because we understand that scared kids do not equal safer kids. But we also need our children to understand that nice people do not always equal safe people. So I will provide you with some information here in a moment on some resources to assist you in having those age-appropriate conversations all the way up and through those young ages on into early adulthood that build on one another, again, in that age-appropriate way to really create a robust support system within your child so that when they do go out to express that autonomy, they have a lot to fall back on for assistance and help if they ever find themselves in a scenario where they feel they're out of control. Now I'm going to switch gears and talk about the man you're here to learn about today. This is Andre Tolfrey. First, I want to speak about photographs. Photographs are updated on average of every year, or should the individual significantly change or modify their appearance. If you were to see this man out in the community and see that he's changed his appearance in a significant way, grown a bigger beard, shaved his beard entirely, grown hair and dyed it, whatever the case may be, certainly do let either his supervision team or law enforcement or both know. And they will attain updated photographs, get it onto the registry, and then I will attain them and ensure that they get put up on the web so that you always have an accurate photographic depiction of what he looks like. These are Mr. Tolfrey's vitals. He's currently 44 years of age, and he will be residing at the 700 block of Plum Street here in Red Wing. Now, often in meetings like this, a question will come along is, "Brad, can we know where he lives exactly?" It would give us a great deal of comfort if we knew where his head hit the pillow at night. And remembering back to the information and data collected by that registry is private data. Know that we do accomplish a great deal, though, in sharing a proximal address, because no doubt those who live in and around this community either already know or are very aware of this location or will become aware of it, and they will share that in and among themselves, and that's just fine. But what we in corrections and law enforcement do not want is for somebody outside of your community who has no stake what you've done and worked so hard to achieve and have there for your families and children, coming in to exact some revenge scenario that serves nothing to mitigate risk and only goes on to destroy and disrupt all the stuff you've worked so hard to achieve. So that is the reason for those proximal addresses. And again, knowing that we really want to focus our energy and mindfulness on the places they spend their waking hours, which most likely will be out in and among the community at large or even neighboring communities. This is Mr. Tolfree's registrable offense history. This is not a comprehensive criminal history. If you're interested in his full criminal history, you can certainly access that. It is available to you. You just need his name and date of birth, which has been provided to you on both the fact sheets that law enforcement have provided and also here in this information that I'm sharing with you today. And you can look him up on the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's website on their criminal history search function, and you can see a comprehensive history. But this today focus on those registrable offenses because that is why we're engaging in broad public notification. And so this is on that fact sheet. You've already had an opportunity to read it, so I'm not going to go over this. I'm going to get right into the details of what occurred with his offenses. So in 2005, this man was convicted of a terroristic threats charge or count, I'm sorry, out of St. Louis County. Now, terroristic threats is not a registrable offense, but you'll see that he had a charge that occurred within the same course of conduct here that was kidnapping and false imprisonment. Now, ultimately, he was not convicted of that. However, in Minnesota, if you are charged with a registrable offense and convicted of offense that arises out of the same set of circumstances, you still have to register. So even though a plea may have been sought to limit the exposure of the victim, for example, in a court proceedings, it does not take away that requirement to register. And so it's a great component to our broader risk management system at large through enhanced sentencing and through registration. Just so I wanted to share that with you. So again, conviction was terroristic threats. Here, he engaged in criminal conduct against an adult female victim whom he knew. He was actually in a dating relationship with this woman. So he had access to her. They were having difficulty in their relationship, whatever was going on, and things went awful and sideways. And the offense, he used force and threats and threats of a weapon in his attempts to maintain control over that situation. And for his crimes, he received a 21-month commit to the commissioner. And this was an upward departure on the disposition. So let me explain what that means. So in Minnesota, we have the Sentencing Guidelines Commission. And that is a portion that's through the determinate sentencing model. I'll get into that here in a moment. But ultimately, that commission sets the severity of offenses year after year. And that severity is taken against the individual's criminal history score and ultimately provides a presumptive disposition. And the court can, in certain circumstances, depart from that. And so that's an enhancement as well. So we can see the enhancement for the registration component, and we see the enhancement for the sentencing on disposition. So it was a presumptive stay, meaning probation. And instead, it was a commit to the commissioner. So he went to prison right out of the gate at sentencing. So another component of determinate sentencing is that you serve 2/3 by law in the institution and 1/3 in the community under supervised release. And I'll get into a little more detail as to why the methods of that are the way they are with the next case. So this is the 2005 registry offense that got him on the registry initially. Now, 2007, this man comes back through the criminal justice system and is convicted this time of a criminal sexual conduct in the 4th degree out of Goodhue County. So here in Goodhue County, this was a criminal sexual conduct against a 17-year-old female victim whom this man knew. So he initially gained access because no doubt parents are going to be thinking, okay, Brad, tell us what we need to know. How does this guy operate? Well, he befriended this child on the internet and used that attention and affection. And this is definitely one of the mainstays we see of those who exploit young teens in this type of manners. They use attention and affection to isolate or somehow get these kids to believe that they care for them. And then he met up with her at her home, and they continued this relationship. Now, sometime after that, a few days after that initial physical meetup, he returned to the victim's home. and used manipulation to gain entry into the home. She wasn't inclined to let him in. She was home alone, and he gave her some sob story, and she decided, okay, fine, you can come into my house. Well, once he came into the house, then he had isolation and access, and he used physical force and threats of violence to maintain control at that time. Once she was able to, she went to law enforcement. And for this crime, he was committed to the Commissioner of Corrections for 71 months. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about that because no doubt the question is, well, Brad, how does somebody who engages in this kind of harm and conduct that shocks the conscience, how do they get to come back out of prison? And so, in part, that lies with determinate sentencing. Like I'd mentioned with his last conviction, is that by law, he is to serve 2/3 of his sentence in the institution and 1/3 on supervised release. And the thinking behind that, to give you a little more insight into where that's come from through research and study across the nation, as many states have gotten away from that parole board model, is this. Is that with crimes like this that are heinous, that shock the conscience, many inmate would find it difficult to get the approval of a parole board for release prior to the expiration of their sentence. Now, no doubt the sentiment often upon hearing that from the community is, you know what, Brad, that's just fine by us. He can sit and serve his entire 71 months. Thank you very much. However, what we found was with this model, it was not effective in reducing recidivism, reoffending in a same or similar fashion, because what was inevitably happening was parole boards were saying or denying parole, saying, nope, you have to stay in. We haven't seen the changes we need to see. And ultimately, they would run out of time. That 71 months would be served, and they'd be walked to the door of the prison and told, don't come back. And our recidivism rates at the early stage of that study reflected that this was not hitting the mark we knew we could achieve. Actually, at the very beginning of the study, our recidivism rates were around 17%. Now, that's no doubt in my mind a lower number than most of you may have assumed. If I were to poll the group of you watching this right now and say, at what rate do you think known sex offenders go out and reoffend at? I'd be lucky to get somebody to say 50%. Most firmly believe that it is way, way higher. However, we do know that for those that have come through the system, that full risk management system, their risk actually is quite a bit lower. But still, 17% was nothing to brag about. And so through that decade-long first initial study, we actually got it down to about a 3% range, 5% overall, okay? And so it's significantly effective to have the 2/3 served in the institution and that final third in the community, where instead of just being done with their with their time in prison and released back to the community with all their rights restored, they have a period of time to work with corrections agents to really show that they can apply the skills and tools that they've been made to learn while in the institution effectively, to make sure their safety planning efforts and those mitigating things we've been talking about are effective. Okay. And so this is how that management system has worked to bring that risk of recidivism down quite a bit. Also, you'll see here 10-year conditional release period. That is an additional enhancer through our components. And so what that means is that final third that he would serve, if you broke 71 months up into thirds, he has to serve, that final third must be 10 years. So it extends that final third. So he has ample time to work with corrections agents in the community. And while out on that 10-year conditional release period, he may be revoked and returned for noncompliance issues if he's failing to meet expectations of his conditions of release. And so just keep that in mind. All right, so his jail or prison chronology breaks down as follows. So in 2005, Mr. Tolfree crosses the threshold of prison for that terroristic threats conviction, remembering that the registrable offense was the false imprisonment component. So he comes into prison, and once he's crossed the threshold, he's assessed by the end of confinement review committee, like we talked about, and he is assigned a risk level of 1. So at this time, he would have been an individual. Law enforcement would have, upon his release into the community at that 2006 date, notify the victim of or witnesses to, if they wanted to know about his release, and also notify other law enforcement agencies, correctional agencies, and immediate adult household members. That would be the scope of notification on him at that time. 2007, we know he comes back for not criminal sexual conduct, or I'm sorry, March 19th, 2007, he is discharged. So he expired from that term of supervision. And so he was off supervision. This was not a man that was under correctional supervision at the time of his next crime. July 2007, so shortly after his expiration, he comes back into prison for that criminal sexual conduct 4th degree conviction. And so clearly concerning with his pattern of behavior. And anyone coming back to prison that has already been assessed and assigned a risk level, regardless of what brought them back. Now, obviously, he's coming back for a sex offense, but even if he'd come back for, let's say, a drug offense, he still would have been reassessed by the End of Confinement Review Committee. And you can see here that in 2011, the ECRC determined his risk to be that of a level 3, broad public notification, to make sure that folks are aware of who he is so he cannot create those relationships of trust and exploit them. And so he was released into the community at that 2/3 mark in 2011 and had been in the community working with agents until his release was revoked in 2013 for technical violations, not new crimes. He was brought back for a significant amount of time, as you can see, and ultimately is set to be released back into the community here January 14th, 2021. He'll be re-released back into the community under intensive supervised release, ISR, which is another of our state's risk management components, is that intensive supervised release component. So as far as his registration requirements and supervision requirements go, this is where things sit for toll-free at this time. He will be under correctional supervision with the ISR agents until February 13th of 2023, and he will be subject to the registry for life. And so even after extradition from correctional supervision and his rights being restored to him, he will still have to let law enforcement know where he lives, where he works, what he drives, etc. And he will, for as long as he remains a level 3, still be subject then to broad public notification. But because, like we talked about, risk levels do fluctuate and change, should he find that he's engaging in all the right positive pro-social risk mitigating conduct and behavior over a significant period of time, he may potentially petition to be looked at for a risk level reduction. And so that would hopefully be an incentive for him to, in addition, to maintain a quiet, law-abiding life. Now I want to talk with you and share with you just briefly a little bit more insight into the intensive supervised release program. Traditionally, in these types of meetings, I like to have the ISR agents on hand to share with you directly, as they will be the ones working with Mr. Tollfree in the community. However, it's just not available to us today, unfortunately. So I'll do my part to share with you kind of the overview of the ISR program, how it operates, and most certainly encourage you to contact the ISR agents directly with any questions you may have about supervision or anything else that may come up specific to this individual with their time in the community. So you can see the ISR came about actually prior to the Notification Act and the registry. Is actually, we got that thing online pretty quickly as the 90s started in on all these new efforts to better manage this population. And obviously it's focused on its primary objective of enhancing public safety. And we do that with ISR through really strict adherence and compliance with those conditions of release. This is why we do see those on ISR who do get revoked and returned to prison. And some may say, well, Brad, it's indicative of their bad behavior or poor conduct. High level of expectations, and so revocations for conduct that may not necessarily be criminal at all are taken very seriously, because we want them to understand. So don't take well, he's been back in prison for X amount of time, so he's really not getting it. Not necessarily. It may actually be a positive thing that we're getting things worked out so that by the time he expires, he has internalized those skills and tools that are going to keep him safe for a lifetime. Ultimately, again, right there, successful reintegration of the community is the goal. This sentence will expire. All sentences expire, with the very, very small group of lifetime sentences. Over 90% of those in our prison systems will be released to the community and will have their rights restored. And so we'd better work hard while we have our time with them to instill those mitigating things in their lives to ensure a lifetime of quiet living. So that reintegration is just so very critical. Ways we do this is a very collaborative effort. Starts out initially in the institution. When they cross that threshold, caseworkers will spin up their case, figure out what's going on with any assessments that have been done on them, psychosexuals, chemical dependency assessments, anger management assessments, et cetera, mental health reviews, ensure that medications are in place, ensure that treatment's lined up, everything's getting locked in at that early stage, working directly with the registrant to ensure that they are joined up with that process. And then the warm handoff over to the community agents, the supervision agents, ISR in this case, where they're working to ensure that safe, stable, and supportive environment that's going to minimize those risk factors, knowing that the highest risk factor is a registrant that is homeless. Even a home that maybe doesn't have all the best options available is still better than living under the bridge. It's a constant balancing act between risk mitigating things and things that are just going to increase risk. The supervision team will utilize various tools throughout their supervision of this individual and all individuals on ISR to include monitoring bracelets. They also will check in and monitor what's going on with, again, their treatment time, medication reviews, et cetera, et cetera. ISR agents do transport from the institution to the home. They are not allowed to just transport themselves. They're placed under, it's a phased program, and so it starts out with house arrest phase that they have to work and achieve certain marks to move off of, and every phase after that. Again, with that successful reentry really being the foundation of what we're doing here. It's not just ride them hard all the way up until expiration, because that doesn't give them the skills that they're going to be most successful with in the community. We want to make sure that as they're showing success, as they're showing adaptation to those expectations of this intensive program, that they start to earn back essentially their privileges and get to do more. ISR operates much like law enforcement 24/7. There's an agent on duty on call. It's that very highly structured thing that makes ISR unique. These agents are out seeing these individuals very, very frequently with direct face-to-face contacts, even in COVID times, and most certainly random unannounced visits. So these individuals have no idea when the agent's coming out, only that they will come out, and that when they come out to see them, they'd better be where they said they were going to be. So they have to submit a daily plan, and if that plan is not approved, they don't get to do it. And if it is approved, they'd better adhere to it. If they can't adhere to it, they'd better have really good reasons as to why. So you can see that level of intensity about what's going on with them. And daily contacts, that's the plan. They're calling in saying, today, my plan is to do X, Y, and Z. This would all be pre-approved stuff. And again, agents are checking on it to ensure that they are doing exactly as they say they're going to be doing in the community. This is the supervision team because, again, it's a 24-hour-a-day program. It's multiple agents. And so if you ever need anything from them, as opposed to giving you one agent's number, we give you their general number. It's a great way to reach out to them and get the on-call agent when you need them. So if you have questions about this individual specifically or just about the program in general, you can certainly contact that number. Make sure you reference the individual that you want to know more about, or the concern that you're having, and a good contact number to get back at you. And the on-call agent will return your call and address whatever questions and information you may have. It really does take all of us. You, the community, are a part of this broader risk management system. By having meetings like this, we are engaging you in it as well. And so you are our eyes and ears. Law enforcement can't be there 24/7. Agents can't be there 24/7, but you live in the community. If you see something that just doesn't seem right, makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, or just causes you concern in general, certainly reach out and call. If it's an imminent threat or concern, I want you to reach out to your local law enforcement. Do call 911. If you think, even if it's not this guy, now that your awareness has been broadened and you just see anything that just again makes that hair stand up on the back of your neck, gives you concern, call law enforcement, get them involved. But if it's a more general question for policing, you want to know how the law enforcement agency in Red Wing addresses this unique population, as you now know, there's more than just these 3 individuals in the community. You can call their non-emergency number. They're a fantastic resource for you going forward, along with the agents. And then as far as other resources, we talked a lot about, or at least a blip about the ages breakdowns of children, and having those age-appropriate conversations all the way throughout young ages into those early adult years. I want you to use the Jacob Wetterling resource as one of those cornerstones in your family safety planning efforts. The folks over there at the JWRC will come out and speak to your family groups, or they'll do it virtually nowadays. They do workshops for children. They do workshops for adults. So if your church group or neighborhood group is interested in further information about this important topic, please have them on your list of people to reach out to. In addition to the JWRC, I want to also inform you or make sure you know of your local victim services provider. Conversations like this on this difficult topic inevitably are going to impact people. Knowing what we know is that the odds that somebody viewing this information has been directly impacted by this kind of harm or conduct, or has supported somebody who has been impacted by this harmful conduct, and we know that they're going to likely view this, and that this inevitably will have a negative impact. It could open up all those old wounds, and it could be really hurtful. And so I want to make sure you have your direct support people in line. Please reach out to them, especially with COVID and all the other stresses in our communities at this time. Do know that there is help and support out there for family safety planning efforts and so on. If you know of anybody who may benefit from this kind of support, please make sure that you get this information to them as well. Just to wrap up everything, and thank you for bearing with me. I know these informational meetings are long, but hopefully you find that this is good stuff that you can really put to work for you. If you take nothing else away from all the stuff I shared with you today, please let it be this, that from what we know from our data and research, and we know a lot, 90% of those who come through that full risk management system for this kind of conduct and harm do not go on to reoffend in a same or similar fashion. 90% of those that engage in this kind of harm are known to their victims and use that relationship to exploit that trust they're given. And so what that means is ultimately is that the 90% of those out year after year actively engaging in this kind of harm are not known to the system. They have not been caught. And so that is why that broad awareness is just so critical. It really does come down to that relationship piece, not residency. It's that social proximity that is so much more telling in how these individuals are able to exploit trust and access than any geographical proximity could ever be. And so this is where we want you to focus your conversations with your children. And you can see how it's reflected in this man's offending behavior from his history as well. So it just really rings true here. Just an additional snapshot of more resources. Please don't let this be the last bit of information you receive on this important topic. Do look at other resources out there. And if you do find a resource and you're not sure if it's a reputable one or from a trusted source, please reach out to one of those agencies I'd mentioned earlier, either the RWPD, the DOC, or the local victim services provider, or the JWRC, to confirm that it's good intel, good research based on solid practices. We want to make sure you're getting the best information available. Lastly, for state resources, I kind of mentioned a few of them as we were going through today's presentation, but just remember the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, while they maintain the registry, and that is for law enforcement purposes only, they also do maintain a public search of criminal records. You can check that out. All you need is an individual's first name, last name, and date of birth. So if you are vetting someone that's coming into your child's life, whether they're a coach or a babysitter or whatever, they're going to be given a role of trust. I encourage you to utilize this tool. All you need is a first name, last name, and date of birth. And if someone you're considering won't provide you with that key information, I would argue they probably don't deserve to be on your short list of consideration. And lastly, the Department of Corrections website has a great deal of information. All the research and data I've been talking about today is available there in its pure form, not just slide version like you saw. You can review it yourself and draw your own conclusions if you so choose, and I encourage you to do so. If you can't find it, certainly contact me. I'll be happy to get you there. We also maintain the offender locator. That is for any offender, regardless of their offense, whether it's a criminal sexual conduct or drug offense or whatever, that is currently under the DOC jurisdiction. You can look them up and see what's going on with them for the duration of their time with the DOC. And then lastly, that public registrant search, where those 470 some or 460 some, whatever it was, are in the community today. With those 11 that are non-compliant, that's the search where you can look them all up. Say, show them all to me, or show me the ones in Red Wing or whatever, or you're going to go up to your cabin and you want to see what's going on up there. It's a tool for you as well. Now, traditionally in meetings like this is where we would be before you and you'd be able to reach out and just or raise your hand and ask questions. Obviously, that's just not available to us yet. But I do really want to encourage you on behalf of the Red Wing Police Department and the DOC to really do reach out with your questions, please. If it's a supervision question, call the agents and the supervision team. They're fantastic people and they're looking to help and inform and educate. If it's a law enforcement or policing question, please call your Red Wing PD. They're fantastic. They've been working with this population for decades and they are exceptionally good at what they do. And if it's a question about the processes and how the ECRC works, or just a broader correctional question, or to some extent registration question, contact the DOC or the BCA. We're here to help you as well. Thank you for your time and your attention on this important topic, and be well.